Mr. Taylor,
Yes, sir.
often on your show, you reference the Austrian School of Economics. Can you bullet point the contrasts between the Australian model and the Keynesian economics model?
Right. I think you mean the Keynesian.
Keynesian, sorry.
Yeah, the Keynesian. Yeah, the Keynesian economics. Well, Keynesian. John Maynard Keynes in the 1930s out of England is basically, I think, if you really cut to the chase, he's more of a communist, more of a socialist, and he believes more government is better government. It's completely opposite to what the founders of the United States Constitution believed. The best government is the least government. So the idea of the Keynesians, of John Maynard Keynes, was that government should step in and get involved and deficit spend, to create economic demand at a time when otherwise there wasn't any economic demand, or when the private sector was decreasing its economic demand. And in that way, the theory was that you could keep recessions from taking place. Well, of course, we've been increasingly following Keynesian economics. Richard Nixon, the President of the United States, said we're all Keynesians now. That was back in the 1970s. So Keynesian economics is taught thoroughly in the universities, would be true in the United States. All the Western world is teaching this sort of socialist economics, which also is very much happy to have government spend to take care of people. So whether it's health care, whatever it is, almost from cradle to grave, Keynesian economics is really favorable towards not the individual, but towards the collective individual. So that individuals are not allowed to be who they are so much in a socialist society. By contrast, free market economics, Austrian economics, which I think is the purest free market economic school of thought, would have limited government, would be in tune with the founding fathers of the United States, and they would like to see, with limited government, maximum freedom for the individual, so that if you're able to keep the fruits of your labor, you are able to take that wealth and use it towards developing new products or enjoying life the way you choose to enjoy it. And that's really basically the difference. One says that markets should allocate resources, and that the free markets, the Austrians believe that free markets will allocate scarce resources much more efficiently than government can. If you think about it, you go to like the Soviet Union, which was a command economy from the top, they would decide how many pairs of shoes should be made across the Soviet Union in one given year. Well, how can a handful of men sitting around a table, or women sitting around a table, decide how many pairs of shoes are going to be needed by an economy through the year? Well, the market takes care of that very easily by simultaneous decisions made by millions of people. And that is how markets allocate scarce resources. In the interest rates, for example, that the Federal Reserve sets now, how does the Federal Reserve know what the right interest rate is? They don't know. They're just guessing. And how do they know how much money is needed in the economy? Well, they don't know. They're just guessing. The founding fathers and the Austrian economists would want to see the market decide what money is. But we have what is called fiat money, which Keynes very much adhered to. And that is, the government declares that this note is money. And the government does not allow, and it created the central bank, the Federal Reserve, and in tune with the Federal Reserve, which, by the way, is not the government, is owned by a bunch of rich private bankers. Those guys decide what interest rates should be, and they create money out of nothing. And then that money is used to reallocate, not only to misallocate wealth, but to reallocate wealth from the people that produce it. I like to say the miners, the manufacturers, the farmers, the inventors, taking money from those people, taking wealth from those people, and sending it to Washington, to the politicians and the bankers, and I guess also very much the military-industrial complex, or the large corporate interest in America. Really, what is happening in the United States, and I think around the Western world without a doubt, is more fascist economics. So you just define fascism in its economic terms. It means powerful private interests working with government to shape the laws in their favor against other people. And that's what we have going on. I think it fits very well with Keynesian theory. Keynesian economics is very much in tune with that sort of dictatorship or totalitarian economic policies that take away from the individuals and take away the freedom of the individual, give it to the ruling elite, the powerful and the rich. So That's really the basic difference between Keynesian economics, which was a statist economic system that wants government to run the whole thing, and the Austrian economists, the free market economists, which are in tune with the founding fathers of the United States, that wanted to see people have the freedom to run their own lives and to allocate the resources as they so choose.
Mm-hmm. Very good. And you pretty much answered this follow-up, but I'll just throw it at you anyway. Given the deteriorating state of the U.S. economy and the value decline of the U.S. dollar, how would applying the Austrian economics template improve the situation, the current situation, if at all?
Well, it would definitely improve it in the long run. In the short term, I think it would be extremely painful, because the Austrian economist would say, stop this money creation. And because we have debt that has grown exponentially for what's been growing faster and faster, it's just, the debt to GDP is far greater now than it's ever been in the history of the United States. Previous high, if you looked at debt to GDP, was about 280%. It's now about 360%. Came down a little bit after the Lehman Brothers decline. So what the markets really want to do is to let this debt go down. They want to see bankruptcies. The market would like to see the truth be told. The insolvency of the country and of individuals and corporations should go bankrupt, and should pay the price for their extravagance and the reckless way they've behaved in the past. That would be very painful, but it would set the stage for a very robust growth, healthy growth, if the government stepped away and allowed the free market to work. Then we could have sustained economic growth, and we could have the prosperity like we've never had before. But unfortunately, people, I think it's sort of natural for human beings and for societies, as they go through long periods of prosperity, they get soft, they get weak, and they want to have it easy. They don't want to adhere to the realities of life. And I think that's where the Western world is now. And I think the Western world is going to come tumbling down. I think we're seeing the start of it with all that's going on in Greece and the United States. And what they're trying to do, instead of recognize that reality and allowing the market to cleanse itself, they are continuing to create more debt, which is going to mean that the ultimate decline, when it comes, and it will inevitably, we're going to have a global crash like we've never seen before, whether we go through some sort of hyperinflationary explosion or whether we go into a deflationary depression, as the markets would prefer. It's going to be very painful, but when it's over finally, then there's a chance that we could have something much better. But if we adhere to free market economics. But what I'm afraid might happen is when the end comes, people say, see, that's capitalism that caused that. But what we have now isn't capitalism. This is why this discussion is so important. What we have is fascism. We have this growing intervention against free market capitalism. So you can't call this capitalism. Mm-hmm. But they will try to call it capitalism so they can retain control. If you say, aha, it's government's intervention that caused this problem, then the masses would get upset and they would say, well, we got to go back to Adam Smith. We got to go back to Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, the founders of the United States Constitution. But so that's my greatest fear. On the other hand, there are people like Ron Paul and others, Peter Schiff, and people that are out there really telling it like it is. And their hope is that when this thing comes down, if enough people tell it like it is, that we'll come back to the right answer and we'll say the real cause of this was not capitalism, but the antithesis of capitalism.
Sure. In the U.S., there's a bipartisan bill, H.R. 1489, afloat to reinstate GlassSteagall, which separates investment and commercial banking, and in the process will deal with the huge amount of derivatives. About 80 congressmen are co-sponsoring this bill, and similar policies have manifested in other countries. Are you aware of these efforts, and do you support such initiatives?
Yeah, I think the notion of going back to GlassSteagall, in a way, makes sense. My preference would be to go back to free market economics, as we were discussing. But given the absence of that, if the federal government is going to if the federal government is going to guarantee deposits, bank deposits, as they do. I think it's $250,000 now for individuals, each account.